The gunshot that ended everything started with a debt Jane Fairmont could not pay. And 23 years later, she still heard that same shot echoing in her nightmares whenever she closed her eyes in the dusty town of Taylor, Texas. It was 1875 when she sold her son for $300 to a cattle rancher passing through, and the years since had carved lines into her face deeper than any canyon the Texas sun had ever created, each one a testament to the guilt that consumed her every waking moment and haunted her through the darkness when sleep finally came. Jane stood behind the bar of the Lucky Star Saloon, wiping down glasses with mechanical precision while her mind wandered to places it should not go. The year was now 1898, and she was 45 years old. Her once bright auburn hair now streaked with silver, her green eyes still sharp, but carrying a sorrow that no amount of whiskey or hard work could wash away. She had been 19 when she gave birth to her son in a back room of this very saloon, barely more than a child herself, with no husband and no prospects in a town that did not forgive such things easily. "Another round, Jane," called out Mickey Davis from the corner table, his voice rough from too many cigars and not enough water. She poured the whiskey without looking, her hand steady despite the tremor she felt in her heart. This saloon had been her prison and her sanctuary for over 2 decades, the place where she had made the worst decision of her life, and where she had stayed ever since, as if leaving would somehow make her even more of a coward than she already was. The door swung open, letting in a blast of hot September air and a stranger who immediately commanded the attention of every person in the room. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty brown coat and a black hat pulled low over his face. When he lifted his head, Jane felt something in her chest constrict painfully. His eyes were blue, startlingly blue, like the sky over Texas on a clear winter morning, and they swept the room with a practiced assessment before landing on her behind the bar. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried despite the noise in the saloon. "I am looking for work and a place to stay. Heard you might have both." Jane forced herself to breathe normally, though something about this man unsettled her in a way she could not name. "We have got a room upstairs, $1 a night. As for work, I could use someone to manage security. Too many fights breaking out lately, and I am getting too old to handle them myself." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I can handle that. Name is Carter Quinn. Jane Fairmont. I own this place." She extended her hand across the bar, and when his large, calloused palm enclosed hers, she felt a jolt of something she had not experienced in years. It was not attraction, exactly, though she could not deny he was a handsome man despite the dust of travel on his face and the weariness in his eyes. It was more like recognition, as if some part of her soul recognized some part of his, though they had never met before. Carter Quinn took the room upstairs and began working that very night. He was efficient and calm, breaking up 2 fights before they could escalate and ejecting 3 troublemakers without so much as raising his voice. Jane watched him from behind the bar, noting the way he moved with the confidence of a man who had seen his share of trouble and learned how to handle it without seeking it out. There was something gentle in his roughness, a carefulness in the way he grabbed a man's arm to escort him out rather than throwing him bodily through the door. "You have done this before," she said when the saloon finally emptied near midnight, and it was just the 2 of them cleaning up the debris of the evening. "I have done a lot of things," Carter replied, stacking chairs on tables with methodical precision. "Most of them I am not particularly proud of." Jane paused in her sweeping, looking at him with new interest. "That makes 2 of us." He met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding that people who carried heavy burdens recognized in each other. I find that the folks most ashamed of their past are usually the ones trying hardest to make up for it in the present. Or we are just cowards who cannot face what we have done, Jane said, the words bitter on her tongue. I do not think you are a coward, Miss Fairmont. A coward would have run from this town long ago. You stayed. That takes a different kind of courage. His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and uncomfortable at the same time. She did not know how to respond, so she simply returned to sweeping while Carter finished with the chairs. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the swish of the broom and the scrape of wood on wood. I had a son once, Jane heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She never talked about this, not to anyone, but something about the late hour and Carter's presence made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could finally speak this truth aloud. I sold him when he was 3 years old. A cattle rancher came through, offered me $300, and I took it because I owed money to some very bad men, and I thought they would kill me if I did not pay. I told myself I was saving both our lives, that he would have a better future with a wealthy man than with a saloon girl mother who could barely feed herself. But the truth is, I was terrified and desperate, and I made a choice I have regretted every single day since. Carter had stopped moving. He stood very still, his back to her, and Jane wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in speaking. Then he turned slowly, and his face was not filled with judgment or disgust, but with something that looked almost like pain. "How old would he be now?" Carter asked quietly. 26, Jane whispered. "He would be 26 years old, and I do not even know if he is alive or dead. I do not know if he grew up happy or if he hates me. I do not know anything except that every night when I lie in that bed upstairs, I wonder if he would ever forgive me if he knew the truth." Carter crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and to Jane's utter shock, pulled her into an embrace. It was not romantic or presumptuous, just the solid comfort of one human being offering solace to another. Jane stiffened at first, unused to being touched with kindness, but then something in her broke and she found herself leaning into his chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs she had held back for more than 2 decades. "I am sorry," she gasped when she finally pulled away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do not know what came over me. You must think I am insane." "I think you are human," Carter said gently, "and I think you have been carrying this alone for far too long." Over the following weeks, Carter Quinn became an integral part of the Lucky Star Saloon, and Jane realized with some surprise, an integral part of her life. He was good at his job, keeping the peace without unnecessary violence, and the regular customers quickly learned to respect him. But more than that, he was good company. After the saloon closed each night, they fell into the habit of sitting together at one of the tables, sharing coffee and conversation while the Texas darkness pressed against the windows. Carter told her about his own life in pieces, carefully measured out like precious water in a drought. He had been a lawman once, in a small town near the Oklahoma border, until his wife and infant daughter had been killed in a raid by outlaws. He had tracked down the men responsible and brought them to justice, but the victory had been hollow, and he had spent the years since drifting from place to place, unable to settle anywhere that reminded him of what he had lost. "I understand why you sold your son," he said one night, his coffee growing cold between his hands. "When you are desperate, when you are terrified, you make choices that seem impossible later. But in that moment, with that fear pressing down on you, you do what you think you must to survive." "Do you really believe that?" Jane asked, searching his face for any sign of false comfort. "Or are you just trying to make me feel better?" "I believe that the measure of a person is not the worst thing they have ever done, but what they do with the rest of their life afterward." You could have drunk yourself to death, could have become bitter and cruel, could have run away and pretended it never happened. Instead, you stayed here, built a business, helped people in this town who needed help. That counts for something." Jane wanted to believe him, but the weight of her guilt was so familiar now that she did not know who she would be without it. "I still wonder if he would forgive me. Every single night." Carter reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten. "Maybe someday you will get the chance to ask him." As autumn turned toward winter, something shifted between Jane and Carter. The late-night conversations grew longer, more intimate. They talked about everything and nothing, about dreams they had given up and small hopes they still harbored. Jane found herself thinking about him during the day, looking forward to the moment when the last customer would leave, and it would be just the two of them again. She had not allowed herself to feel this way about anyone in years, had believed that part of her life was over, sacrificed along with her son. "I am too old for this," she said one night in early December, when Carter had walked her upstairs to her room as he always did, but this time had lingered in the doorway instead of immediately retreating to his own quarters. "Too old for what?" he asked, though the heat in his eyes told her he knew exactly what she meant. "For whatever this is. I am 45 years old, Carter. I have made such a mess of my life." "I am 43, he replied, stepping closer, "and I think we have both made our share of mistakes. But I do not think it is too late to have something good. Do you?" Jane's heart hammered in her chest. She had not been with a man in any meaningful way since before her son was born, too afraid to let anyone close enough to see all her broken pieces. But Carter had already seen them, had held her while she cried about the worst thing she had ever done, and he was still here, looking at her like she was something precious rather than something ruined. "I am scared," she admitted in a whisper. "Me too," Carter said, and then he kissed her. It was soft and careful, a question more than a demand, and Jane found herself answering by rising on her toes and kissing him back. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in 23 years, Jane Fairmont felt like maybe she was not alone in the world. They did not rush. They stood in that doorway for long minutes, just kissing and holding each other until finally Carter pulled back with a shaky breath. "I should let you sleep," he said, though he made no move to leave. "You could stay," Jane offered, her courage surprising her. "If you wanted to." Carter's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his usually serious face into something almost boyish. "I would like that very much." They did not make love that night, not yet. Instead, they lay together in Jane's narrow bed, fully clothed, talking and kissing until the sky began to lighten with dawn. It was more intimate than anything Jane had experienced in her life, this simple sharing of space and warmth and truth. Carter told her about his daughter, about how she had just learned to walk before she died, how her laugh had sounded like bells. Jane told him about her son, about the way he had said her name, about the look in his eyes when the cattle rancher had taken him away. "I told him I would come back for him," Jane said, the memory as sharp as broken glass. "He reached for me and cried, and I told him it was just for a little while that I would come back, but I never did. I was too afraid and too ashamed. I convinced myself he was better off forgetting I ever existed." "Children do not forget their mothers," Carter said, his arm tightening around her. "Not really. Whatever anger he might carry, I think there is probably love there too. Children understand fear better than we give them credit for." "I hope you are right," Jane whispered into the darkness. "I hope wherever he is, he has had a good life. That is all I have ever wanted for him." As Christmas approached, Taylor Texas transformed itself with the determined cheerfulness of a town that knew how hard life could be and chose to celebrate anyway. Jane and Carter had become an established couple, and while some of the townspeople gossiped about the saloon owner taking up with her hired security, most seemed genuinely happy for Jane, who had been alone for so long. Carter moved his belongings into Jane's room, and they fell into domestic rhythms that felt both startling and natural. But Jane's past was not done with her yet. On a cold morning in late December, a stranger rode into Taylor on a black horse, asking questions about Jane Fairmont. He was a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that were an unsettling shade of green. He did not come to the saloon directly but spent the day talking to various townspeople, asking about how long Jane had lived there, what kind of person she was, whether she had any family. It was Thomas Miller, the blacksmith, who finally came to warn her. He burst into the Lucky Star just before noon, his face flushed with exertion and concern. "Jane, there is a fellow asking about you all over town. Says he is looking for someone, would not give me a name, but he seemed mighty interested in your history." Jane felt the blood drain from her face. Carter, who had been repairing a broken chair near the bar, was at her side immediately, his hand on her elbow. "What do you think this is about?" "I do not know," Jane said, but that was a lie. She knew, somewhere deep in her bones, that her past had finally caught up with her. The question was whether it came in the form of retribution or something else entirely. The stranger walked through the door of the Lucky Star at exactly 2 in the afternoon, when the saloon was relatively quiet with only a handful of regulars nursing drinks and playing cards. He was even younger than Jane had feared, probably not more than 26 or 27, with a face that was handsome in a hard sort of way and eyes that swept the room before landing on her behind the bar. "Jane Fairmont?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the space. "That is me," Jane said, her hands gripping the edge of the bar to keep from shaking. Carter moved to stand beside her, a solid presence at her back. "What can I do for you?" The stranger approached slowly, and as he got closer, Jane could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. That probably does not mean anything to you, but it should. I was born Connor James Fairmont, in a back room of this saloon, 26 years ago." The world tilted sideways. Jane heard a roaring in her ears and felt Carter's arm slide around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. "Connor," she breathed, the name she had not spoken aloud in over 2 decades falling from her lips like a prayer. "So you do remember," Daniel said, his voice harsh with bitterness. "I wondered if you would even know who I was." "I have thought about you every single day," Jane said, her voice breaking. "Every single day since the moment I let you go." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me go. That is a nice way to put it. You sold me, like a horse or a piece of furniture, to a man who treated me like an investment. Do you know what it is like, growing up knowing your own mother chose money over you?" "It was not like that," Jane said, tears streaming down her face. "I was being threatened. I owed money to men who would have killed me, probably killed you too. I thought I was saving your life, giving you a chance at something better than I could provide. You thought selling your child to a stranger was saving him." Daniel's voice rose, drawing the attention of everyone in the saloon. "You had no idea what kind of man Richard Whitmore was, what he would do to me. You just took his money and handed me over." Carter stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I think maybe this conversation should happen somewhere more private. Why don't we go upstairs?" Daniel looked at Carter for the first time, really looked at him, and Jane saw the calculation in her son's eyes. "Who is this? Your new husband? Another man to replace the one you got rid of? "This is Carter Quinn," Jane said quietly. "And he is a good man who has shown me more kindness than I deserve. But he is right. If you want to yell at me, if you want to tell me what a terrible person I am, I will listen to every word. But let us do it upstairs, not in front of the whole town." For a moment, Jane thought Daniel would refuse, but then he nodded stiffly and followed her and Carter up the stairs to her room. Once inside with the door closed, the space felt too small, the air too thick. Daniel stood near the window, his arms crossed over his chest, while Jane sat on the edge of the bed and Carter remained standing near the door, giving them space but ready to intervene if needed. "Tell me," Daniel said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "Tell me why you did it. And do not lie to me. I have spent 23 years imagining this conversation. I deserve the truth." So Jane told him everything. She told him about being 17 years old and falling in love with a cowboy passing through town, about how he had promised to marry her, and then disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. She told him about how her parents had disowned her, how the owner of the saloon at the time had given her work out of pity, but paid her barely enough to survive. She told him about borrowing money from Maxwell Granger, a man who ran illegal gambling operations and worse, promising she would pay him back but never quite managing to earn enough to clear the debt. "He came to me when you were 3, Jane said, her hands twisted together in her lap. "Maxwell came with 2 of his men, and they made it very clear that if I did not pay what I owed with significant interest by the end of the week, they would hurt me in ways that would ensure I could not work anymore. He said I was lucky to be pretty enough that hurting me would be a waste, but that luck would not last forever. I was terrified, Connor. I was 22 years old and I did not see any way out." "So you sold me," Daniel said flatly. "Richard Whitmore came through town that same day, looking for a child to adopt. He was wealthy, successful, and he offered me exactly the amount I needed to pay off Maxwell and have a little left over. I told myself you would have a better life with him, that you would grow up with opportunities I could never give you. I told myself I was being selfless." Jane's voice broke completely. "But the truth is, I was a coward. I was so scared of what Maxwell would do to me that I sacrificed you to save myself, and I have hated myself for it every day since." The room fell silent except for the sound of Jane's quiet crying. Daniel stood motionless at the window, staring out at the street below. Carter remained by the door, his face grave but compassionate. Finally, Daniel turned to face his mother. "Richard Whitmore was not a kind man," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "He wanted an heir for his cattle business, someone he could mold into the son he could not have naturally. He was strict and demanding, and nothing I did was ever good enough. When I was 16, I ran away. I have been on my own since then, working cattle ranches and doing odd jobs trying to figure out who I was supposed to be." "I am so sorry," Jane whispered. "I am so sorry, Connor." "My name is Daniel," he said sharply. "I have been Daniel Whitmore for 23 years. Connor Fairmont does not exist anymore." "All right," Jane said, nodding even as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Daniel, I am sorry, Daniel. I know that does not change anything, that it does not make up for what I did to you. But I need you to know that I am sorry." Daniel's jaw worked, and Jane could see him struggling with emotions he probably did not want to feel. "Why did you never come looking for me? Even after you paid off your debt, even after all these years, why did you not try to find me?" "Because I was a coward," Jane said again. "I convinced myself you were better off without me, that showing up in your life would only hurt you more. I told myself that you had forgotten me, that you were happy, and that my guilt was a price I deserved to pay for what I had done. But the real truth is I was too afraid to face you, too afraid to see the hatred in your eyes. Well, now you see it, Daniel said harshly. Is it everything you imagined? Carter spoke up from his position by the door, his voice gentle but clear. I do not think that is hatred in your eyes, son. I think it is hurt, and I think maybe part of you was hoping for an explanation that would make sense of why your mother did what she did. Daniel turned on him. You do not know anything about me. You are right, I do not, Carter agreed. But I know what it is like to lose people you love, and I know what it is like to carry anger around like a shield because it hurts less than letting yourself feel the sadness underneath. I am not saying you should forgive your mother. That is your choice and yours alone. But I am saying that maybe you should ask yourself why you came looking for her after all these years. I came looking because I needed to know, Daniel said, his voice raw. I needed to know if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted what she did, or if I was really that easy to forget. Jane stood up from the bed, moving toward her son slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. You were never easy to forget. You were impossible to forget. Every child I saw, every boy around your age, I wondered if it was you. Every night, I lay in bed and wondered if you were safe, if you were happy, if you would ever forgive me for what I did. You have been the first thought in my mind every morning and the last thought before I sleep every night for 23 years. Daniel's composure finally cracked. His face crumpled and he turned back to the window, his shoulders shaking. Jane crossed the remaining distance between them and, hardly daring to breathe, placed a tentative hand on his back. He flinched but did not pull away. I wanted to hate you, he said, his voice muffled. I have spent so many years building up this hatred, imagining what I would say to you, how I would make you feel as small and worthless as you made me feel. But now that I am here, now that I see you, all I can feel is how much I missed having a mother. Jane's arms went around her son, and after a moment's hesitation, he turned and hugged her back, really hugged her, the way a child hugs a parent after a long separation. They stood there together, both crying, both holding on like they were afraid the other would disappear if they let go. Carter quietly slipped out of the room, giving them privacy for a reunion that was more than 2 decades overdue. They talked for hours. Jane told Daniel about his father, about the man who had left her pregnant and alone. Daniel told her about his childhood with Richard Whitmore, about the loneliness of growing up in a cold household where love was conditional and praise was rare. He told her about running away, about the years he had spent drifting, about how he had finally saved enough money to hire someone to track down information about his birth mother. I found out you were still here, still running this saloon, and I almost did not come, Daniel admitted. I thought maybe it was better to let the past stay in the past. But then I realized I would spend the rest of my life wondering, and I could not do that anymore. I am glad you came, Jane said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness and I am not asking for it, but I am grateful to see you, to know you are alive and well. That is more than I ever hoped for. Daniel looked at her seriously, his green eyes so much like her own. I cannot promise you forgiveness right now. This is all too fresh, too complicated, but maybe we could try to get to know each other as the people we are now rather than the mother and child we were. I would like that, Jane said, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I would like that very much. Daniel stayed in Taylor, taking a room at the boarding house down the street and finding work at one of the nearby ranches. He came to the Lucky Star most evenings, sitting at the bar and talking with Jane during quiet moments, slowly building a relationship that was tentative but real. Carter gave them space while also offering his own quiet support, and Jane found herself falling more deeply in love with him for his understanding and patience. As winter gave way to early spring, the three of them formed an unlikely family of sorts. Daniel warmed to Carter, recognizing in him a steady, decent man who genuinely cared for Jane. They talked about Daniel's work, about Carter's past as a lawman, about Jane's plans for expanding the saloon. The conversations grew easier, the silences less awkward. Jane watched her son slowly relaxing, the hard edges of his anger softening into something that looked almost like peace. One evening in March, as they sat together after closing, Daniel said something that made Jane's heart stop. "I got a letter from Richard Whitmore." Jane set down the glass she was polishing with shaking hands. "What did it say?" "He wants me to come back to take over the business. He is getting older, and apparently his health is failing. He said he regrets the way he treated me, that he wants a chance to make amends." Daniel's voice was neutral, but Jane could hear the uncertainty underneath. "What do you want to do?" Carter asked, always the voice of reason. "I do not know," Daniel admitted. "Part of me wants to go back, to prove to him that I made something of myself despite everything. Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell, and part of me does not want to leave Taylor because I have just started to build something here." "You should not make this decision based on me," Jane said quickly. "If going back to Richard Whitmore is what you need to do for yourself, then you should do it. I will not lose you again, not really. We have found each other, and that does not change even if you are not living in the same town." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You really mean that, do not you? You would let me go again, even though it would hurt you, because you think it is what is best for me." "That is what parents are supposed to do," Jane said softly. "Put their children first. I failed at that once spectacularly. I will not make that mistake again." To her surprise, Daniel smiled, and it was the first time she had seen him smile without bitterness or reservation. "I am not going back to Richard Whitmore. I spent the first 16 years of my life trying to please a man who could not be pleased. I am not interested in spending any more time on that. I like it here in Taylor. I like the work I am doing at the ranch. And I like getting to know my mother, even if it is complicated and sometimes uncomfortable." Jane felt tears prick at her eyes again, though these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "You are sure?" "I am sure," Daniel said. Then, more quietly, "I think maybe I am ready to start forgiving you. Not all at once and not perfectly. But I think I understand now why you did what you did, and I think I believe that you have regretted it. That has to count for something." Jane reached across the bar and took her son's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Thank you. That means more to me than you could possibly know." Carter, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed emotion, cleared his throat. "I think this calls for a celebration. Daniel, how would you feel about helping me build an addition onto the saloon? Jane has been talking about expanding, and I think the three of us could manage it together." Daniel's smile widened. "I think I would like that." The spring and summer of 1899 passed in a blur of hard work and slowly healing wounds. The three of them labored on the saloon expansion, adding a proper dining room and several additional guest rooms upstairs. Daniel proved to be skilled with carpentry, a talent he had apparently learned working on various ranches, and Carter's steady leadership kept the project moving forward. Jane cooked meals for them, managed the saloon, and watched with profound gratitude as her son and the man she loved developed a genuine friendship. There were still difficult moments. Sometimes Daniel would withdraw, the old anger and hurt rising up unexpectedly, and Jane learned to give him space while also letting him know she was there if he wanted to talk. Carter was invaluable during these times, offering Daniel a male perspective and a listening ear that was not weighted down with the complicated history between mother and son. In July, On a particularly hot evening, Carter took Jane aside after the saloon closed. "I have something I want to ask you, but I want to make sure the timing is right." Jane's heart began to race. "What is it?" Carter pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small garnet stone. "I want to marry you, Jane Fairmont. I know we are not young, and I know we both carry our share of scars, but I love you and I want to spend whatever years we have left together, officially and permanently. Will you marry me?" Jane looked at the ring, then up at Carter's face, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. She thought about all the years she had spent alone, punishing herself for a choice she could not undo. She thought about how Carter had taught her that it was possible to move forward without forgetting the past, to build something new without erasing what came before. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in September, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Taylor. Daniel walked Jane down the aisle, a moment that felt both surreal and perfectly right. The townspeople filled the pews, most of them genuinely happy to see Jane Fairmont finally finding joy after so many years of visible penance. Carter's vows were simple but heartfelt, promising to stand by her through whatever challenges came. And Jane's own vows included a quiet acknowledgement of the second chance she never thought she would receive. The reception was held at the Lucky Star, naturally, with food and drink and dancing that lasted well into the night. Jane danced with her new husband, then with her son, and the feeling of Daniel's arms around her in a simple waltz was something she had never imagined she would experience. When the song ended, he kissed her cheek and whispered, "I am glad you found him, Mother." It was the first time he had called her mother, and Jane had to excuse herself to the back room to compose herself before she could return to the party. Carter found her there a few minutes later, pulling her into his arms and holding her while she cried happy tears into his shoulder. "I never thought I could have this," she said when she could finally speak. "I never thought I deserved to be this happy." "Everyone deserves happiness," Carter said, tilting her face up so he could look into her eyes. "Even people who have made mistakes, especially people who have spent decades trying to atone for those mistakes. You have punished yourself long enough, Jane. It is time to let yourself live." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Carter sold his few possessions and moved fully into Jane's room, which they expanded to make into a proper suite now that the saloon renovations were complete. Daniel continued working at the ranch but spent most evenings at the Lucky Star, often bringing friends from work and introducing Jane as "my mother," the owner, with something that sounded almost like pride. The years that followed were not perfect, but they were good. Daniel eventually met a young woman named Sarah who worked at the general store, and they courted with the sweet awkwardness of young people figuring out love for the first time. Jane watched her son fall in love and felt a fierce protectiveness mixed with joy. She had missed so much of his life, but she was grateful beyond measure to be present for this. In the spring of 1901, Daniel and Sarah were married, and Jane gained a daughter-in-law who was kind and practical and seemed to genuinely care for her troubled new husband. They settled in a small house near the ranch, and within a year, Sarah was pregnant. The news sent Jane into a spiral of complicated emotions, joy and grief and fear all tangled together. "What if I am terrible at being a grandmother?" she confessed to Carter one night. "What if Daniel does not want me around his child given what I did to him?" "Daniel has forgiven you," Carter reminded her gently. "Maybe not completely, maybe not in every way, but enough to build a relationship with you, enough to include you in his life. You need to forgive yourself now, Jane. You need to let go of this guilt that has been eating at you for 27 years. "I do not know how," Jane admitted. Start by accepting that you did the best you could with the resources and knowledge you had at the time. You were young and terrified and facing violence. Yes, you made a choice that hurt your son, but you also made a choice that kept you both alive. Richard Whitmore was not a warm father, but he was not an abusive one either, from what Daniel has said. Your son grew up fed and clothed and educated. Could things have been better? Of course. But they could also have been much, much worse. You need to acknowledge both those truths. Jane thought about Carter's words for a long time. It was hard to let go of guilt that had become such a fundamental part of her identity, but she recognized the truth in what he was saying. She had punished herself for nearly 3 decades. Maybe it was time to accept that she was human, that she had failed in a spectacular and painful way, but that she was also trying every day to be better. When Daniel and Sarah's son was born in early 1902, they named him Connor James, and when Daniel placed the baby in Jane's arms and told her the name, she wept. "We wanted him to carry your name and the name you gave me," Daniel said. "Because even though my childhood was complicated, you gave me life, and that matters." Holding her grandson, Jane felt something shift inside her, a weight she had carried for so long finally beginning to lift. This tiny person, this fresh start, represented a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. Connor James would grow up knowing his grandmother, would never question whether he was loved or wanted. In some small way, Jane could give to him what she had not been able to give to his father. The years rolled on, marked by the rhythms of life in Taylor, Texas. The Lucky Star Saloon thrived under Jane and Carter's joint management, becoming known throughout the region for its fair prices and lack of violence. Daniel advanced to foreman at the ranch, and he and Sarah had 2 more children, a daughter they named Clara, and another son they called William. Jane and Carter were deeply involved in their grandchildren's lives, babysitting regularly and attending every school event and birthday celebration. On quiet evenings, when the saloon was slow and the Texas sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, Jane and Carter would sit on the porch they had added to their upstairs suite, looking out over the town. Carter would hold her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm, and Jane would think about how strange and wonderful life could be, how the worst thing she had ever done had somehow led to the best things she had ever known. "You still think about it?" Carter asked one such evening in 1905. They were in their 50s now, grayer and slower but still healthy and strong. "About the choice you made." "Every day," Jane admitted. "But it is different now. I still regret it, still wish I had been braver or smarter or found another way. But I can also see that we survived it, Daniel and I. We found our way back to each other. That does not erase what happened, but it does mean something." "It means everything," Carter said, leaning over to kiss her temple. "It means that love is stronger than mistakes, that people can heal even from the deepest wounds, and that it is never too late to try to make things right." A few months later, Daniel showed up at the Lucky Star on a Sunday afternoon, his expression serious. Jane's heart immediately began to race, old fears surging up. "What is wrong? Are the children all right?" "Everyone is fine," Daniel assured her quickly. "I just wanted to talk to you and Carter about something." They settled at a table in the empty saloon, and Daniel pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I got another letter from Richard Whitmore. He is dying, apparently. Lung fever. He wants to see me before he passes." Jane felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Richard Whitmore had been the man who took her son away, but he had also been the man who raised him, for better or worse. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go," Daniel said. "I need closure with him the same way I needed closure with you, but I want you to come with me." Jane blinked in surprise. "Me? Why?" "Because you are part of this story too," Daniel said, and because I think I need you there. Richard Whitmore was never a real father to me, not in the ways that mattered. But Carter has been, these past few years, and you have been a mother to me even when I did not want you to be. I want to face this last piece of my past with my real family beside me." Carter reached over and took Jane's hand. "If you want to do this, I will be right there with you." So they made the journey to Richard Whitmore's ranch in West Texas, traveling by train and then wagon across dusty plains under vast skies. The ranch was impressive, sprawling and prosperous, and Jane could see why Daniel had felt out of place there as a child. Everything was grand and cold, built to impress rather than to comfort. Richard Whitmore was indeed dying, propped up in a massive bed in a room that felt more like a mausoleum than a place where someone lived. He was in his 70s now, his face gaunt and his breathing labored. When Daniel entered with Jane and Carter, the old man's eyes widened. "So you came," Richard rasped, "and you brought her." "This is my mother, Jane Quinn," Daniel said, his hand on Jane's elbow, "and her husband, Carter. They are my family." Richard's gaze fixed on Jane, and she saw judgment there, but also something that might have been understanding. "I always wondered if you regretted it, selling him to me." "Every day of my life," Jane said quietly. "But I am grateful he survived, that he grew up safe even if he was not always happy. Thank you for that much, at least." The old man coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I was not a good father. I tried to make him into something he was not, tried to fit him into a mold he did not belong in. I told myself I was giving him opportunity, but really I just wanted an heir for my empire. I am sorry for that." Daniel stepped closer to the bed, his expression carefully neutral. "I am not here to forgive you or to absolve you. I am here because I needed to see you one last time, to close this chapter of my life. You gave me food and shelter and education, and for that I am grateful. But you never gave me love, and that is something I have had to learn to live without." "The boy has spirit," Richard said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "I tried to break that out of him, but it stayed. I suppose I am glad for that now." He turned to Jane. "I told myself I rescued him from you, from a life of poverty and shame, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe he would have been better off with a poor mother who loved him than a rich guardian who saw him as a commodity." "We will never know," Jane said. "All we can do is move forward from here." They stayed for the funeral when Richard Whitmore died 2 days later, but they did not linger. Daniel inherited the ranch, much to his surprise, but he immediately arranged to sell it and donate most of the proceeds to an orphanage in Austin. He kept enough to expand his own small ranch in Taylor and to set up trust funds for his children. "I do not want his money," Daniel explained to Jane on the train ride home. "But I can use it to do some good, to help other children who do not have families. That feels right." Jane hugged her son tightly, proud beyond words of the man he had become despite everything he had endured. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both small and large to Taylor, Texas, and to the Quinn family. The Lucky Star Saloon became something of a landmark, known for its longevity and the love story of its owners. Jane and Carter aged gracefully together, their hair going fully white but their devotion to each other never wavering. Daniel's ranch prospered, and his children grew into fine young people. Connor James, the eldest, showed an early aptitude for business and talked about someday expanding the family holdings. Clara was fierce and independent, reminding Jane of herself at that age, but with the confidence that came from growing up loved and secure. William was gentle and thoughtful, often spending hours at the Lucky Star listening to his grandparents' stories about the old days. In 1910, when Jane was 57 years old and had been married to Carter for 11 years, She finally allowed herself to say something she had not said in decades. They were lying in bed one night, the window open to let in the cool autumn breeze, and Carter was running his fingers through her hair in the way that always made her feel safe. "I am happy," Jane said, the words simple but profound. "I know I do not deserve it. I know I failed in terrible ways, but I am happy." Carter propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her, his blue eyes soft with love. "You do deserve it, Jane. You have worked for it, fought for it, earned it through years of trying to be better. And I am happy too, happier than I ever thought I would be again after I lost my first family. You and Daniel and those grandchildren, you are my family now, and I thank God every day that I walked into this saloon that night back in '98. "I love you," Jane said, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Carter replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. "Now and always." As the first decade of the new century gave way to the second, the Lucky Star Saloon began to show its age, and Jane and Carter talked seriously about retirement. Daniel, now in his late 30s and successful in his own right, offered to buy the saloon and run it himself, with the understanding that his parents could live upstairs for as long as they wanted. "Are you sure?" Jane asked, touched by the offer but not wanting to be a burden. "You have your own business to run." "I have a foreman who can manage the ranch," Daniel said. "And I have always loved this place, despite everything it represents. It is where I was born, where I was sold, but also where I found you again. I think I can make peace with all of that by taking it over and making new memories here." So in 1912, Daniel Quinn took ownership of the Lucky Star Saloon, and Jane and Carter officially retired, though they still helped out during busy times, and Jane still kept the books because she could not quite let go of that particular responsibility. They traveled some, taking trips to San Antonio and Houston, marveling at how the world was changing with automobiles and electric lights and moving pictures. But they always came back to Taylor, to the room above the saloon that had been Jane's home for more than 40 years, to the family that had somehow miraculously been rebuilt from the broken pieces of her worst mistake. On a warm evening in June of 1915, the Quinn family gathered at the saloon for a celebration. Connor James had just graduated from university in Austin, the first in the family to do so, and he was returning to Taylor to help his father run both the ranch and the saloon. Clara had gotten engaged to a young lawyer from San Antonio, and the wedding was planned for the fall. William had announced his intention to become a teacher, wanting to work with children who came from difficult circumstances. Jane sat at a large table surrounded by her family, Carter's hand warm in hers, and looked around at the faces of the people she loved. Daniel, now 42 and gray at the temples, laughing at something his son said. Sarah, still beautiful and kind after 14 years of marriage, serving food and making sure everyone had enough. The grandchildren, nearly grown now, full of dreams and possibilities. And Carter, her Carter, who had shown her that redemption was possible, that love could grow even in the hardest soil. "What are you thinking about?" Carter asked, leaning close so only she could hear. "I am thinking that I spent 23 years wondering if my son would ever forgive me," Jane said softly, her eyes on Daniel's face. "And I am thinking that the answer is yes, he did. Not all at once and not perfectly, but he did. And I am thinking that maybe, finally, I can forgive myself too." Carter kissed her cheek, his beard tickling her skin. "That is all I have ever wanted for you, love. To let yourself be happy, to accept that you are human and flawed but also good and worthy of love." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people who know your worst secrets and love you anyway. Jane danced with Carter, then with Daniel, then with each of her grandchildren in turn. When she finally sat down, exhausted and exhilarated, Daniel slid into the chair beside her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Jane asked, genuinely confused. "For never giving up. For staying in this town, in this saloon where I could find you when I was ready. For building a life that I could become part of. For loving Carter and giving me a good father figure when I needed one most. For being honest about your mistakes instead of trying to justify them. For all of it." Jane felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving me a chance to know you, to be your mother even in this imperfect way. Thank you for building a family that I get to be part of. You did not have to do any of that." "Yes, I did," Daniel said, his green eyes meeting hers with perfect honesty. "Because despite everything, despite the pain and the anger and the years lost, you are my mother. And I needed you in my life, even when I pretended I did not." They embraced there at the table, holding each other while the party swirled around them, and Jane felt the last piece of her guilt finally crack and fall away. She would never forget what she had done, would never stop wishing she had found another way. But she could finally accept that she had been young and terrified and imperfect, and that she had spent the rest of her life trying to be better. That had to be enough. It was enough. The years that followed were gentle to Jane and Carter Quinn. They watched Clara marry her lawyer and move to San Antonio, though she visited often and eventually had children of her own. They celebrated when William opened a small school in Taylor for children from poor families, offering free education to anyone who wanted to learn. They beamed with pride when Connor James expanded the family business, turning the Lucky Star Saloon into a respectable restaurant, and while still maintaining its character and history. Daniel remained a constant presence in their lives, stopping by every day to check on them, to share news, to simply sit and talk the way parents and children do when they have built real, lasting love between them. He and Sarah remained devoted to each other, their marriage a model of what partnership could look like when two people truly committed to growing together. In the spring of 1920, Carter fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed into something more serious. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and warned that at Carter's age, 65, recovery would be difficult. Jane nursed him tirelessly, barely leaving his bedside, and Daniel was there constantly as well, helping his mother care for the man who had become his true father in all the ways that mattered. Carter rallied for a while, seeming to improve, and Jane allowed herself to hope. But on a warm May evening, with the windows open and the sound of birdsong drifting in, Carter took her hand and said, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Jane said, her throat tight with fear. "Promise me you will not spend the rest of your life grieving. You have done enough of that. When I am gone, I want you to keep living, keep loving, keep being part of this family you and Daniel built. Promise me, Jane." "I promise," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But you are not going anywhere. You are going to get better." Carter smiled, that same gentle smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago. "Maybe. But if I do not, I need you to know that these years with you have been the happiest of my life. You saved me, Jane, just as much as I like to think I saved you. We saved each other." He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, with Jane holding his hand. The loss was devastating, a grief so profound that Jane did not know how she would survive it. But she had promised Carter she would keep living, and she had her family to support her. Daniel moved back into the saloon temporarily, taking his old room so he could be close to his mother during her grief. He made sure she ate, made sure she got out of bed every day, made sure she knew she was not alone. Sarah brought the grandchildren to visit regularly, and their energy and love helped pull Jane back from the edge of despair. "He would not want you to give up," Daniel said one evening, 6 months after Carter's death, when Jane was still struggling to find purpose without her husband. "He would want you to keep going, to keep being part of our lives." "I know," Jane said wearily, "but it is so hard. He was my partner, my best friend. I do not know who I am without him." "You are my mother," Daniel said firmly. "You are grandmother to 5 grandchildren. You are a businesswoman who built something from nothing. You are a woman who made terrible mistakes and then spent decades trying to make amends. You are all of those things, with or without Carter. He would want you to remember that." Slowly, painfully, Jane began to rebuild her life around the Carter-shaped hole in her heart. She threw herself into helping Daniel with the restaurant, into spending time with her grandchildren, into supporting William's school and attending Clara's children's birthday parties in San Antonio. She allowed herself to grieve but also to live, honoring the promise she had made to her husband. As the 1920s progressed and Taylor grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community, Jane became something of a matriarch, respected for her longevity and her honesty about her past. She did not hide what she had done, and younger women in difficult circumstances sometimes came to her for advice, knowing she would not judge them for their mistakes. "I sold my son when he was 3 years old," she would tell them honestly. "And I spent 23 years wondering if he would ever forgive me. He did, eventually, and we built a relationship that has brought me more joy than I ever thought I deserved. But I cannot lie to you and tell you there is an easy path forward from the choices we make in desperation. All I can say is that if you keep trying, if you keep loving, sometimes you get a second chance. Not always, but sometimes." In 1925, at the age of 72, Jane Fairmont Quinn was diagnosed with heart trouble. The doctor told her she might have a few more years if she took it easy, but that her time was limited. Jane accepted this news with more grace than she had accepted most things in her life, feeling that she had been given far more time than she probably deserved. She spent her remaining months making sure her affairs were in order, dividing her belongings among her children and grandchildren, writing letters to each person she loved explaining what they meant to her. Daniel was with her constantly, and they talked about everything and nothing, making up for all the years they had lost. "I need to tell you something," Jane said one afternoon in late summer, when the Texas heat pressed down like a weight and she could barely find the energy to breathe. "I need you to know that my only real regret is those years we missed, those years when you were small and I should have been your mother. If I could go back and find another way, any other way, I would. But I cannot. All I can do is thank you for giving me these last 26 years, for letting me be part of your life." Daniel, now 52 years old and gray-haired but still strong and capable, took his mother's frail hand in his. "I want you to know something too. I forgive you, completely and fully. I have probably forgiven you for a while now, but I want to say it clearly so you can hear it before you go. I forgive you for selling me. I forgive you for being scared. I forgive you for being human. And I thank you for giving me life, even though you could not raise me yourself. I had a good life, Mother. Not perfect, but good. And these last years with you have been the best of all." Jane closed her eyes, tears of relief and gratitude slipping down her weathered cheeks. Those were the words she had needed to hear, the words she had been waiting for since that terrible day in 1875 when she had handed her son to a stranger. She had received her forgiveness, had built a family, had found love and redemption. It was enough. It was more than enough. She died peacefully on a September evening, surrounded by her family. Daniel held one hand and Connor James held the other, while Sarah and Clara and William and all the grandchildren crowded into the room, wanting to be there for the end. Her last words were "thank you," spoken so softly that only Daniel heard them. They buried Jane Quinn next to Carter in the Taylor Cemetery, under a large oak tree that provided shade even in the hottest months. The entire town turned out for the funeral, a testament to how much she had meant to the community. Daniel delivered the eulogy, his voice strong despite his grief. "My mother made a terrible mistake when I was young," he said to the assembled crowd. "She sold me to a stranger because she was desperate and afraid. For years, I hated her for that. But as I grew older, I came to understand that people are more than the worst thing they have ever done. My mother spent every night for 23 years wondering if I would forgive her. When I finally found her again, we built a relationship that healed both of us. She taught me that redemption is possible, that love can overcome even the deepest wounds, and that it is never too late to try to make things right. I will miss her every day for the rest of my life, but I am grateful beyond measure that I got to call her mother." The Quinn family continued to thrive in Taylor, Texas, for generations. Daniel ran the Lucky Star restaurant, and until he was too old to manage it anymore, then passed it to Connor James, who passed it to his own children in turn. The story of Jane Fairmont Quinn became part of the family lore, a tale of mistakes and redemption that reminded each new generation that people were complicated, that forgiveness was possible, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Every year on the anniversary of Jane's death, the family gathered at her grave under the oak tree. They told stories about her strength and her courage, about the guilt she carried and the forgiveness she earned. They talked about Carter, the cowboy who had loved her despite her past, who had taught her that she deserved happiness. And they talked about the bond between mother and son, broken and then rebuilt, stronger for having been tested. The saloon building still stood in downtown Taylor well into the 21st century, converted into a museum that told the history of the town and the people who had built it. Among the exhibits was a section devoted to Jane and Carter Quinn, with photographs and documents and a written history of their lives. Visitors read about the young mother who sold her son and then spent decades trying to make amends, about the cowboy who helped her find redemption, about the son who came back and learned to forgive. It was a love story, ultimately, though not the simple kind. It was a story about maternal love and romantic love, and the complicated love between parent and child. It was a story about the American West, about survival and desperation, and the hard choices people made in impossible situations. But most of all, it was a story about second chances, about how it is never too late to try to make things right, and about how forgiveness, when it finally comes, can heal wounds that seemed too deep to ever close. In the end, Jane Fairmont Quinn got everything she had wondered about during those 23 years of guilt and longing. Her son did forgive her. They did build a relationship. She did find love and family and a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The road to that forgiveness was long and painful, marked by years of separation and suffering, but when mother and son finally found each other again, they created something beautiful from the broken pieces of their shared past. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their earthly work is done, Jane and Carter Quinn were together again, watching over the family they had built and the legacy they had left behind, proof that even the worst mistakes could lead, eventually, to grace.